Yeah, we're live at 2:30 in the afternoon. So I'm here way before 7. Might do another one at 7. Got lots of stuff to talk about. Mostly I was excited about the photo that I was sent from the guys in Sweden doing the testing, the testing for Kenny Bell. And they have the AMR500 blower on the blower dyno now. And he sent me a photo of the setup that they use, and you can see a couple of things which are very cool. One, the blower is on the dyno, going through, being put through the paces, which is very, very cool. The other thing is that the blower has a custom drive pulley on it, so they've made a custom drive pulley for it. And the drive pulley, if you look closely at the photo, and I'll show you guys in just a minute, if you look closely at the photo, you'll see the drive pulley actually has RPM sensor, an RPM sensor on it. So what you can do is, and obviously there are a lot of guys that have pointed this out when I posted the video on the AMR500, that if you can tell if the belt's slipping, obviously if we're monitoring both engine speed and we're monitoring blower speed, and we could see that if one, falls off relative to the other, that's what happens. And that's why they have it there. But that way they get a super accurate measurement of how fast the blower is spinning, because we can multiply. The other thing is we can multiply this out and go, well, I think that the pulley is this size, but is it? I mean, how are you measuring it? What is the actual size of the blower pulley? So this way, there's no guesswork, there's no estimation. They give you the actual RPM of the blower, and then that actual RPM can be correlated with the airflow and the boost level and the charge temperature and how much power it took to drive it. And so all good data. So again, more data, always better. Be very interesting to see. I'm very excited to get that data and take a look at it. But I'll show you, I can show you what I'm talking about here. I can bring this photo up. So let's see if we can get around here. So you can see what I'm talking about here. I got the AMR500 supercharger. We got the inlet going in. This is the custom pulley that they made for it. We've got a RPM sensor here. You can see probably just keying off of these, those two bolts right there. So obviously that thing's keyed. We got sensors. We got either pressure or temperature data. See, lots of cool stuff here. Lots of cool stuff going on. That's actually the thumbnail, so I wanted you guys to see it just in case you couldn't see the thumbnail already. But as you can see, very cool stuff. So I'm excited to see all of the data, and then, just like always, when you generate all of the data on the dyno, the thing that does is give you basically more questions, because that's what happens. And so I want to get that information to compare it, but more than that, obviously I want to run it. And last night I was talking about going through the procedure of making because what I want to do is run the 1 liter Chevy Sprint motor that I have. It's sitting in my storage, in my shop storage. I want to run that on the engine dyno, but I need to adapt it to a bell housing. So one of the guys asked, well, can you go do a video on the procedure for that? And yeah, I can. I think that would be a good idea, because really the procedure that I'm using would work for any adapter plate for any two combinations. It doesn't matter. You just have to solve a couple of problems. And so I'll go over this really quickly to tell you what I will be doing. And we can start out with a Chevy bell housing, but it could be any bell housing. So what I have is a Chevy bell housing. And what I'm going to do is, the way that I do it is I make what I call a transfer plate. So I don't put all of this, I don't mark all of this on the finalized plate yet. I like to make a really, I work with a thin piece of sheet metal or something and make a preliminary one. That way, if I make any mistakes on my measurements, or, and when I go to mock it up, if it doesn't work perfectly, then I go, oh, well, this one needed to be over this way a little bit, or this one needed to be adjusted. Normally, it just works out and goes on. And then I wish I would have just done that to begin with the other thicker metal plate, because I'm going to do this out of steel. But I like to make this first, and then it just transfers over immediately. So it's very, very easy. But what I do is I'll take the plate, and the plate needs to be big enough to cover from, essentially, because this is going to be if you think about the bell housing, the back of a block, this will go from the transmission, mounting holes on the back flange of the block for the small little Chevy Sprint turbo motor, and we'll adapt that up to something else. Let's say a small block Chevy. It might not be a small block Chevy. We might do the V6 bell housing or something, but so it's got to be, it's going to be basically a piece that goes around and covers both sets of bolt holes. So it'd be very easy. But the problem is, and let's say that we take but the plate has to be bigger than that to start out with, because one of the key elements of all of this is the center line of the crankshaft. So it's the center line of the crankshaft and the input shaft on the dyno. Those have to made up relative to the other mounting points on the bell housing. So what I do is I take the plate. It's going to be a piece of square steel. I set the bell housing down on, I trace the bell housing out, and then I trace, if we had a small block Chevy, I would trace the dowel holes and then the mounting holes, and then go, okay, this is where I have it. What I also do when I do that is I'll reach in like with a Sharpie or something, because this is just a rough drawing. It just gives me an idea. What I'll do is reach in. This is the clutch lever hole, and some of our bell housings are cut out of the bottom anyways. I reach in and I just trace around the upper side of the bell, the upper inside of the bell housing. This gives you an idea like how thick that mounting flange is, and then whether or not any of that basically is going to overlap against the plate that you're going to use when you bolt this to the factory 1 liter Sprint. Are any of those bolt holes going to overhang? And that simple trace will give you an idea. Oh yeah, we're nowhere near that, so it's not going to be a problem. Or some of them are going to be a little bit close. And if they're close, what I do is we'll just use countersunk bolts so that they're out of the way and they're flush, and it won't stop anything from mating together. So I do that. I have all those holes. But the important thing is, and what I would do is we would then drill out I would start out with the dowel hole. So I think on the Chevys, let's say that they're 1/2 inch. So we drill out 2 holes, mate the plate to the bell housing, and then I need to find the center line of the input shaft off the dyno. So I would mount the bell housing on the dyno, and then what I did is make a sleeve that goes over the snout of the input shaft, and the sleeve on the end of it is turned down to a point. So that's exactly the center. So I made the sleeve just long enough so it sticks out proud of the facing of the bell housing. So it sticks out just a little bit and hits the plate. And where that thing hits the plate, you just tap it a little bit with a hammer and you have your starting point. That is the center line of the crankshaft. And that's very important, because when you take this plate off and you have to go over to the other motor, the 1 liter Chevy Sprint motor, that's what it's going to register off of. So now you have the center of the crankshaft for the 1 liter Chevy Sprint, and then that's what you're going to start with. So what I'm going to do is, because this block is not a bare block, it has the crankshaft and everything in it, which are going to stick out from the transmission facing, from where the block mates to the transmission. You can't get this plate up against that facing because the crank's in the way. So what you have to do is, the crank has a register on it. So what we have to do is drill that hole out using that as the center line, because we know that's the center of the crank. You have to drill that hole out so it just slides over the facing of the crank. That's not a problem, but that has to be done on a mill, because we want the fit to be pretty exact, not just a hole saw, which gets it close. We'll do this on the mill, and then we'll mill out that center hole, and then it'll slide right on that crankshaft. Look, it's all set. And then the only other thing you have to do after that is you have to make sure that luckily both of these engines or motors are kind of straight up and down. Some of them have a slant to them, like the little 2.2 or a slant 6. Some of them are canted relative to the bell housing. So you have to look at that, but this is straight up and down. So you just have to make sure that it's, roughly straight. So what I have to do then is, now I have to make sure that I have to get the mounting, because this thing now is like, let's say that my adapter plate is this far away from the mounting face of the block on the 1 liter Sprint. Well, now what I have to do is, I have bolts, the transmission bolts or something that has that thread, that go into the block. I make whatever distance that is that I have to take up. I make those and turn those down just like I did the snout to register the center line of the crankshaft. And what I do is make basically pointy threaded rod ends or all thread kind of, and I screw those into the block. And then what those do is those will give me center punches. Basically, those will tell me when that plate is registered on the crank. Those coming all through to touch that plate will show me exactly where all those holes are. So again, just tap those, and you could even do them one at a time, but just tap all those. Now you have all of the bolt holes. So now what you can do is once you drill those bolt holes out, you can cut out the rest of it. So you no longer need the center, flange to line this thing up on the crank. Now you can cut out the pieces that you don't need. So now you have a plate that will bolt onto the back of the 1 liter Chevy Sprint. Also has the bolt holes for the small block Chevy. So now all you have to do is bolt that onto the Chevy Sprint motor, and then you can now bolt that onto the small block Chevy bell housing. So it's not a lot of work if you do it, correctly. But what I'm going to do is I won't drill or tap any of those holes, obviously, if I'm just using this this transfer plate. In fact, I won't even drill them out all the way. What I'll do is find the center line of each one of those and drill very small holes. I could take this plate, lay it on my steel plate, line it all up, and then just use a clicker punch to start all your things to go. They all go right there, so that'll all be very easy. And then we can drill, and if we have to tap those, or if we have to we're going to put dowels in them, because we're going to locate the adapter, into the small block Chevy. We'll have dowels in it, and we'll either have backups for the dowels, or we'll tack weld the dowels in place, whatever works. And we don't know what's going to happen with all of this. And this is another reason that I do this, this kind of test plate is because you can run into problems that you need to solve that you don't foresee ahead of time. So if you go through this and you just did it with a tiny little plate where you didn't have to drill a bunch of holes and spend a bunch of time and energy and money and ruin a 3/8 thick steel plate, then you go, oh, this is not going to work. There's no amount of this is going to work that's going to make this work. Or it will work if I change this and this and this. And it's an easier pivot when you do that. And that's one of the reasons that I like to do that. But making that plate and using that procedure could work for anything, could work from, this to that. It all works out. And it's all something that you don't need. We're going to do that with a mill when we cut that initial hole. But, and there obviously, I'm sure guys are going to chime in with other ways to do this. This is the way that I like to do it because it's all stuff that I have access to. And it's fairly simple. You don't have to, you could put it on CMM and you could digitize it. You could do all that. All that's fantastic. And that's fine. And that works. And guys have done it like that. I just don't have access to that. So, or I would have to go ask somebody to do that. And I just, this is all something I can do. And I kind of like doing it. So that's what I'll do. So we'll see what you guys got going on for this morning. Oh, by the way, if you guys have not, please go take a look at the video that I just put up. Coyote versus LS. The Coyote guys are going to be very happy. Let's just put it that way. And subsequently, they'll be hard to live with. And then I already have comments. I thought that I put it in the video that people will be complaining that I used a 5.3 LS instead of a 6 liter or a 6.2 or the marketplace competitor, the Camaro versus the Mustang or whatever. But that's just because that's what they have. Yeah. So what do you guys got going? Wisconsin's in the house. Could you run on a Predator Ghost motor? What, the AMR500? I'm sure you can. Anything that's less than 100 horsepower, you can do that. Off to work I go. There you go. I love the shirt. Yeah. Hopefully I'm back on my adjustable camera because it seems to work better for the other videos that I'm doing, and it seems to work better on this green screen too, but let's see. At what point in power do you need forged rods and pistons? It's always a good idea, but lots of guys are out there running them probably where they need them, but they haven't done it yet. And as you've seen, we have, hundreds of runs on these things, on these LS motors at boosted at 1,000 horsepower power levels, and it still works. So I don't know where that is, but if I was going to put it in a boat and run it at wide open throttle for long periods of time, I would use that. Really got to start selling shirts. So how close were the numbers to what you got? I don't know yet. I don't have any data yet. That point you need for Tristan. Well, Tristan, we did 1500 on a 6-liter and it's still alive. So I'm thinking you could do 1000 horsepower stuff pretty easily. Curious if you could make a video on a manifold, whether or not there's an exponential horsepower gain from a fast versus a TBSS, and a gain and boosted gain, assuming a gain of 30 wheel horsepower would equal 30 wheel horsepower boosted. The gain that you get from the fast is going to depend on the combination that you're testing it on. So if you're testing it on a stock 4.8, you're going to get very little. If you're testing it on a cam 6-liter that has good heads on it, you're going to get quite a bit. And the boost is just going to multiply what's there. So you can get even more of a gain under boost than you get NA. And I have lots of videos up on putting fast manifolds on and then running boost on them. Finally done with my medical problems. Turbo Sentra, what's up? Good, glad to see you're back, man. Back to the Sentra, trying to get a Mega Squirt 2 and cams for the race season. An equal compression 6-liter would be a great comparison, 12-1. An equal compression to what? But they didn't make that from the factory. That's why we didn't do that. The Gen 3 stuff has gone. The Gen 3 6-liter went to 1480 horsepower. That's where it broke. But quite honestly, I'm not sure that that's because of the strength. Maybe it is. But we ran lots and lots of runs in the 12 to 1300 horsepower range on the 4-liter, the 5.3, and lots of them near 1200 horsepower, even on the 4.8 were the Gen 3 stuff, because all of those were Gen 3. And then later on, we went with one Gen 4. Isn't the Coyote engine a double overhead cam 4 valve? Yes, it is. Equal compression would still be cool video. Got to beat the Coyotes. A modified 6-liter beats a Coyote. So, but you know, a new Coyote is even better. But then a new LT motor is even better too. 5.7 Hemis are good also. Yeah, there's no doubt about the Coyote being good. It makes a lot of power. The complaints for the Coyote are not that it doesn't make power or that it doesn't make as much power as an LS, because it does. The complaints about Coyotes are for me, bore spacing. I don't like that. A 5-liter Coyote is good, but a 6-liter Coyote would be awesome. So bore spacing and available, displacement increase in the Coyote. Expense, they're hard to find and they're money. But honestly, if you were looking for a 6.2, an aluminum 6.2, it would be money also. So if you're looking for something that can actually equal the performance of a Coyote in a junkyard LS, it's not cheap either. A junkyard 5.3 is very cheap. And if you're trying to get 1000 horsepower, there would be no comparison between those two, because I would just get an LS because it would be way less money to do that. But there's no doubt that they can make lots of power. I like the 6.2 Fords, cannon valve, dual plug, flows like a Coyote, can grow past 400. I just haven't seen lots of guys doing stuff. What's the highest compression you've done on an LS? I've heard stories of guys running 15-1. It would depend on what displacement you're doing, because that's going to kind of limit what static compression you can run, because it's just swept volume. If you don't have a lot of displacement on a 4.8, it's hard to get to 15-1, because the dome that you'd have to make would just be ridiculous and probably not very efficient. V8 Supercar Coyote is 650 horsepower, 5.4 liter. The Camaro uses a 5.7 LS with the same power. Is a Coyote direct injected? The new ones are, yeah. The one that I ran was not. Coyote's way cheaper than my 427 LS3. Probably so. Yeah, you can spend lots of money on an LS. There's no doubt about that. We've got an AMR. Jeremy's got an AMR500 on a 420 go-kart. That's cool. Oh, with a draw-through carburetor? Yeah. You kind of should have that with a positive displacement blower, I'm thinking. Although if I run it on the Sprint motor, it's not going to be a draw-through. Although I could, because it doesn't matter that we have the fuel injection on there. We could run it carbureted anyway. The video I'm working on, the next video that I'm working on is a Super Richie intake manifold, a dual plenum one. And I want to show you what happened when we merged the plenums, when we had a connector between the plenums and then didn't have a connector between the plenums, and then also had different runner lengths, and actually how all of that compares to a fast manifold on an LS3 based motor. It's Super Richie getting the job done. 862 heads on a 4.8. Yeah, they come stock with those. How much milling is acceptable before you run into valve clearance issues with flat tops? That's going to depend more on your camshaft. You don't want to take too much off of the head. You're going to run into other problems. Most people take 30 off. You start running into intake fitment problems on that. Next step is an older no rev limit coil. Is that how they have the rev limiter built in? Is with a coil? It's interesting. I like the idea of a carburetor on top. You know, like the on Facebook, I'm part of or I watch the group, the AMR500 stuff. And there's lots of Volkswagen stuff on there with draw-through carburetors. So I think that's pretty cool. Seeing side drafts on them and down drafts and all that, and all that's just obviously good. All that's good stuff. But on this Coyote video, when you take a look at the difference, it's pretty substantial. And you don't really get a feel for that until you overlay the graphs and go, oh, wait, that's like a lot. And then you think, okay, Coyote 4-valve motor, it's going to be a high RPM motor. No, it's not. Not in stock form, it's not. And also, it's very, very torquey. In fact, the specific torque output is like really, really good. Way better than the LS is. I was looking at the Engine Masters competition. Kazi built some Wild Stroker 5.4 base engines. Yeah, they did 400-ish inch versions of the 5.4 motor. It wasn't a Coyote, but it was the 5.4 and 5.8 motors. Need to get something carburetor to play with. I've never had a car with a carburetor. They're cool. Just think of the carburetor as naturally aspirated intercooling, because that's all good, right? So what did you guys think of the setup on the AMR500? So we gotta have a pole, right? Gotta have a polio. Okay, the Coyote would rule the aftermarket if it weren't for cost and size. So yes or no? Like to understand how to tune a car with a modern like air-filled meters. It's really a lot easier to tune carburetors when you can actually see what's happening. A lot of times, a guy would do it by ear, do it by RPM, and you can there are guys that are really good at that. But for me, seeing the number, but then you correlate the number with what's happening to the motor, because you're like, oh, well, this is at idle. I want it to be 14.7. That's not always the case. Sometimes it doesn't run very good at 14.7 at idle. Sometimes it wants to be in the 12s. So sometimes it's just much happier. And so you got to do both. You got to listen to what's happening. And then, like I said, when we've run lots of these motors on the dyno and we run them at 11.5 to 1 on a naturally aspirated motor and then start leaning it out, it's like, I'm not making any more power. And then you can even start to lose power. You're like, but we're not going to start really making power until we get to 13 to 1. But that's not the case. And on some of the videos, we've seen possibly why that's the case. because we have such a big disparity between individual cylinder at the actual like air fuel in the individual cylinders. And so we're leaning one out too much where it starts to get into misfire possibly. And you don't want to lean it out too much to where you get into damaging the motor. Sorry to jump into the suggestion game. No, you should. That's fine. That's why we're here. But an AMR500 on a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder Jeep, that's not a Iron Duke motor, right? Is it like that though? But yeah, if it's a sub 100 horsepower motor, then it would be good. The LS platform is king because of cost of packaging. I feel like the size of the Cody isn't much of an issue with most of the cars from Ford's last 3 decades. Yeah, that's probably true. It's big on top. It's got game on top. It's top heavy. Lots of people like that. I was impressed. The thing that impressed me the most with the Coyote was when we were doing modifications on it was the specific torque output. Even the 462 valves, yeah, they do look big. Not as big as the 4 valves, but they do look big. And then the 5.4s with a taller deck height, even more so. You like them top heavy? Coyotes would rule aftermarket if it weren't for cost and size. How much weight does a Coyote hold on the LS1 is another good question. Yeah, somebody asked about that. Somebody in the comments, they wanted to know what the weights were. We don't have a big scale there at Westech, so I've never weighed any of these motors. Wonder if the high specific torque output has to do with the good implementation of VVT. It's a lot of things. It's the long runner intake manifold. It's VVT. It's high static compression. It's good cams to begin with, although we got the highest number after we did ported heads and after we put camshafts in them. So it wasn't the stock stuff that did the best. So I think we saw 470 something foot-pounds, if I remember right. It was quite a bit. It was no joke. Here we go. Let's see. Final CNC ported heads. Yeah, it made a lot more torque without the... When you put the Boss intake manifold on there, it kind of kills it. Yes, 475 foot-pounds of torque. So that's quite a bit. That's 1.57. That's a big torque number. Foot-pounds per cubic inch. That's a really big number. My Engine Masters motor, I think it did make that. 6. I don't know if it was up at 1.57. That's a pretty big number. That's pretty high specific. I think that's the high, certainly the highest specific output thing that we've ever done like that. Yeah, you can't just swap Coyote heads on the 6.2. I think that makes good twist too. Was our test with full accessories? Let me take a look and see. On the Coyote, we had more stuff on it than we normally do because that's the way that it had to run, but I'm going to take a look and see. No, it did not have all the accessories on it. It had a I think it had the factory water pump on it though. I'm trying to look and see how we were spinning that. take a look here and see. Normally we run a Mizzier electric pump, and I know that we had one for a Coyote, and I think that, or for a modular Ford, and I thought that the Coyote was the same. Ford modular, 5-liter, Coyote upgrades, Coyote. Yeah. Let's try a different one. We had to run a bunch of stuff when we did the Kenny Bell on it. We had the alternator and a few things on there. No, there weren't accessories on it. I know she uses a lot of electric water pumps. We do on the engine dyno just because it makes life easier. Running all the accessories on it is a pain, because especially if you have to have the power steering and stuff on there. They're not. You could use them for the street, but I think that Mizzier doesn't recommend them for daily driving. I don't think there's enough of the Coyote engines currently in circulation at the moment. Well, certainly not anywhere near what the 5.3 LS is. I mean, how many million trucks did they make? And then, but Ford had a lot of, didn't Ford make a lot of the 5-liter trucks as well? And there's some marine engine of the LS that had overhead cams. I think somebody did do a double overhead cam LS Mercury Racing. Yeah. Hemi's the king of airflow. 7-liter LS double overhead cam. I have seen the blueprint 4-cylinder, but it's not a real thing. Should be a lot of 5-liter F-150s. I thought that there would be. There are more Triton V10s out there. I don't see a lot of those. I see a lot of the other motors. We'll go to live chat. It's live. It's all the way live. 72% are saying, yeah, the Coyote would rule. Why does nobody do anything on the Triton V10s? I would like to. There obviously isn't a ton of aftermarket support, most notably camshafts for those. It'd be cool if we had like 3 or 4 different cams to choose from. Somebody could custom grind everything, but do you want to spend thousands of dollars on your $300 V10? You feel like having 2 extra injectors would be helpful on a big power setup? Well, what it would do is help spread the power that you make out, so that you'd have less power per cylinder. So theoretically, maybe that helps. But I don't know that the V10. I don't know what the strength limit is. if I make it popular, so I need to do that. Richard, take it upon yourself to create an industry around the V10, the long dead V10 modular Ford. I do think they're cool, but they're heavy and they're big. And when you break, pistons, you got to buy more of them. Excursion Drag Racing Series. I think the Dodge guys win the V10 series because I think that they got something shiny here. Their V10 is bigger, and Some of them came with the actual Viper V10. Which blower would you go for on a 6-liter? The Cadillac blowers. Cadillac blowers hard to find adapters for anymore, but Tom DeMuse has the adapter set up to do the GT500 blower. So either one of those are good, or the bigger Ford one. Or you could go with the ZL1, you know, the LSA blower if you could find those. None of those are really cheap though. You'd have to see what the costs are all in those. I don't know what it is. 9-liter stroker Vipers, yeah, because that's what everybody needs. Is an 8-liter Viper motor is just like a small block. You need a 9-liter one, right? A 6.8-liter V10 produces more peak torque than a Gen 1 8-liter Viper. What were those 450 horsepower and 480 foot-pounds or something, if I remember right? Let's just get those off the top of my head. Oh, 400 horsepower. Okay. The GTS was 450, right? 465 foot-pounds. Okay. Weren't the first gen Viper heads a lot like the and I'm not a Mopar guy, so but I thought that they were kind of like Magnum heads. Viper motors love boost. Just get to insert any motor in that statement. The twin turbo like built Viper motors are pretty nuts though. But it's 8 liters or 9 liters, depending on how big. Lots of guys doing stroker versions of that too. Because if you're gonna put one together, you know, bigger is obviously better. You want to do a big bang on a Willys F134? What motor is in that? I just want to run the little blower. And I want to run the little blower and a turbo. It'll be interesting to see. And what will be cool, this will kind of be cool. So let me know if you guys think that this will be cool too. And if you don't, then I'm just going to delete you from the channel. But but what will be interesting, if we can run the sprint motor on the engine dyno, run it with a turbo at 10 pounds, run it with a blower at 10 pounds using the same intercooler and all that stuff, maybe E85 or whatever, just as long as it's the same, and then see what the power difference is. And then see if that power difference is exactly what the power consumption number is that we got from the blower dyno test. That'll be cool. Not a Mopar guy either. I was kind of surprised to hear good things about the 5.7. I like the Hemis. The Hemi to me is the Mopar's version of the LS. I don't think it gets enough respect. It has really, and I did a book on the first gen one. Not the first gen Hemi, but the first gen of the Gen 3 Hemi. I did a lot of testing on those, and the factory heads, especially imported form, were really, really good. And the factory intake manifolds were all really good. They had a lot of stuff going for them. They just needed camshaft. The AMR on a Honda, yeah, 1.8, not even a non-VTEC B series 1.8 is going to be too much, because that's already 130 or 140 horsepower motor. I'm only good with that only if afterwards we twin charge it. That's the plan. You got to compare the two, and then you got to put both of them on there. And what you would do is put a bigger turbo on the 1 liter, which I have already, and then we use the blower to spool that one up. You know, because twin charging is cool, but if you twin charge it for like a good reason and demonstrate that, it would be even better. The Willys engine makes 75 horsepower brand new. That's like a perfect application for it. And if it's a carbureted deal, that's an easy bolt on, because you just have to find a way to drive the blower. And the nice thing about those is the way that the inlet and outlet are, they lend themselves to a variety of different mounting positions. Intercooling, aftercooling, or both for twin charge sprint car? Yeah, you'd do both. You'd have an intercooler between the blower, between the turbo and the blower, and then between the blower and the manifold. Withdrawing fuel through the AMR kill bearings? It hasn't so far. All the Volkswagen guys are doing it. I don't know about longevity. I don't know how sealed the bearing is in the housing, or if that bearing housing is on the other side of the plate, which it should be fairly sealed and not have to worry about that. But I haven't taken one apart, so I don't know. I wonder if a twin charge sprint car. Oh, you're talking about a sprint car, like a racing sprint car. No, this is a Chevy Sprint Turbo, and my Chevy Sprint Turbo would not be good to take to Pikes Peak. It still is not going to make nearly enough power for, 10 to 14,000 feet of altitude. Yeah, this is not a sprint car. This is not like a 950 horsepower alcohol stack injected 300 or 410 inch sprint car motor. This is a 1 liter 3-cylinder. That's why we're putting the AMR500 on it. Otherwise, an AMR500 wouldn't even work on a single cylinder of a sprint car motor. The AMR on a VW or Mercedes diesel. Yeah, again, any of those would be good. But what's the issue with putting a blower on a diesel? Is it too much blower for a Predator 670? I don't know what isn't a 670 like a 40 horsepower motor? If it is, like I said, anything that's the Geo Metro motor is only a 50 to 60 horsepower motor. Marine diesels have blowers, yeah. Lots of turbo diesels. And blowers on the old diesel motors, on the Detroit diesels, but they were used they weren't used to boost the motor though. I've seen turbo and supercharged 2-stroke stuff. Those are poll doing 68%, saying yay, Coyote. Should get a Wankel and make a lot of supercharged road with 2 AMRs. It would take 2 AMRs to do justice even to like a 12A. So it would have lots of induction noise, and if you put a header on them, they have lots of exhaust noise. And you could throw flames out, which is kind of cool. Lots of flamage. Yeah, I do want to test the Chevy Sprint Turbo 1 liter 3-cylinder, so nobody's confused, with both the turbo and the blower. That would be cool, because I have the Garrett. I think it's a GT20 or a GT22, which is a pretty good sized turbo for that motor. Is a 250 horsepower turbo, I think, if I remember right, when looking at the compressor map. And so it would be a lot softer than the little, which is why I did a compound setup way back with using the stock little turbo. But we replaced the small factory turbo with that big Garrett turbo. Putting the supercharger on there would help spool that thing up quite a bit. a bit late, but being within striking distance of a gator. Was being the gators. Yeah, I don't get, I don't know, not really, not really fear there. Just respect for things in the wilderness. It was very, very cool for me to be that close, because you go to a gator park where you're behind a fence or whatever, or you see them in like my thing whenever I went to a zoo was always like reptile houses and things like that. So that was always cool. But being out there with them and knowing how to behave and stuff, it's very cool. It did give me new respect from when we were walking through the swamps during the day, thinking, hey, this is maybe not a good idea. Then you see them at night, you're like, oh yeah, there's like really big things in here. How long do you think before you get to play with a Toyota GR3 cylinder? I don't know, maybe forever. I don't have any plans for that. Yeah, no fence changes it a lot. It is, and you're really close. But it's the same thing with all of the rattlesnakes and water moccasins and various kinds of things that we run across. Just if you know what to do and don't freak out and stuff. And have a pokey stick or something, that's all it takes. And you've seen both Crocodile Dundee 1 and Crocodile Dundee 2, you feel like, yeah, I think I pretty much got this. Is there an advantage of a side draft car versus a down draft? I think that they do that for positioning of how they wanted to mount the blower more than anything else. The nice thing is, I don't know how many Volkswagens that they had were going to go around corners and stuff, but they tend to not, slosh fuel nearly as bad. And so for road racing applications, the Weber stuff is pretty nice. And they sound good. I liked them. I had side drafts on my Z and they sound good, but thinking back, with as much money as you spent on those, on the mine were actually Webers too, so they were not cheap. But it would have been so much better to put a turbo on it. It would have been a lot faster, but I didn't. You just don't know. You see all the Z's and you're like, oh yeah. I remember my buddy, guy that lived across the street from him, had a Z, and he was an older guy, and his was the cleanest one I'd ever seen. It was like bright red, and he had a polished valve cover, and he had side drafts, and it was, the engine compartment was all like detailed and everything, and the guy, it was always under a cover, and he was that kind of guy, which was awesome. And he would let us come over and look at it, and I'd go, oh dude, that's like the coolest thing I've ever seen. And so you see something like that, you're like, oh yeah, I gotta have a polished valve cover, I gotta have side drafts. Updraft carburetors, yeah, for aviation too. Of whatever downdraft 2-barrel intake, 22R. And I've seen guys do, way back, Corky Bell used to do blow through Delordos. He didn't do it with the Webers, and I haven't looked in to figure out. I'm sure somebody knows. Burns might know. He's probably done it. As to what the difference are, why the Delordos were chosen over the Webers. There's something about the circuitry in the Webers that he didn't like. But he would build the boxes over the Delordos. And I'm sure that they would do what we always do, is just increase the fuel pressure to the carburetors and stuff. What will twin GT35s do on a stock 5.3? They will support more than 1,000 horsepower, but you won't get there probably on a stock 5.3. I mean, you might, but it's just going to take a lot of boost if you wanted to do that. Otherwise, they'll work okay. Apples to apples would be a direct injected Coyote to an LT6. Is an LT6 the new naturally aspirated one? Actually, a direct injected Coyote versus an LT1 or an LT2, I think would probably be marketplace competitors. You got to find a Predator carburetor. I don't see big changes if the air fuel is the same, but I haven't tried one. The Edelbrock carburetor is actually pretty nice. That works pretty well. Ford doesn't make that Voodoo engine anymore, right? Wasn't that just for the GT350 and then now they're done with it? I know Brian was excited on the new GM that they kept the bore spacing the same with a double overhead cam, so that was nice. So that means you can have bigger ones. You can have stroker versions of that, or if the marketplace is any indication, de-stroker versions of it. De-stroke your 8,000 or 8,500 RPM, whatever. How's our poll doing? We're going to go ahead and close that out at 70%. Showing some Coyote. I don't know about the Voodoo crank. I don't know about the fitment on that. They do sound good, but not good enough to go through all that vibration. Tristan, you can get away with 80-pound injectors for 1,000 horsepower on a 6-liter if you're running gas. If you're doing E85, you need like a 1,500 cc. Maybe a fanboy of the 400M. I know, that's a good... I kind of want to do another one of those. They still sell cross-plane versions of the 5.2 crate motor, but not flat plane versions. It's probably smart. I think with the 400, we could have made a lot more power with that. If we would have had more compression. I know it's a Cleveland stroker. The only thing bad about the 400M is the intake availability. $1,500 cc's is the fuel flow. £80 would be a little more than 800. I don't really have a favorite engine. It's whatever the next one I get to test is. And sometimes it's the same one that I tested before, but as long as it goes on the dyno and runs, then that's my favorite one. Yeah. Oh, is that what you're asking, Tristan? What's why you need more? You need more because you have to flow way more E85 for the same amount of power. Because the stoic value is different on E85. It takes more fuel to make that power, but it's higher octane. It has cooling. It's a better fuel. But to make the same amount of power, you have to have more injectors. You have to have bigger injectors, which doesn't hurt you at all, as long as you're tuning it. Is a 1,500 cc Snake Eater better or worse than a 220 pound Bosch? I don't know. I don't know that I've run those Bosch injectors before. I tend to flow them all on the machine at West Tech before we run them. Sometimes even injectors I've used a lot, if they've been sitting for a while, which sometimes happens with dyno availability in my schedule, then I'll just take them out and just flow them and make sure that they're working okay. Because it's better to know before, because that's one of the things I dislike about, that's one of the problems I don't like about dyno testing. That's one of the problems I don't want to have. I don't want to have to take the oil pan off. That's not good. But I don't like having to drain the fuel and stuff, because it's always going to spill. And so having to change the injectors because you have an O-ring leaking, or the fuel rail is, cocked off to one side or whatever, or you have to change the injectors, or you have one that's not firing. First thing we'll do is if we have a hole that's dead, we just check that with a heat gun, and then we'll go over and tap on the injector. Sometimes it'll just go, oh, you want me to be flowing fuel? Okay, we can do that because it had, it was momentarily clogged. And sometimes it'll fix it, but that's why flowing them beforehand, before you put it together, you just check that off the list of the things that this is not broke. We know because we checked them all. The E85 thing, I think, is covered in the injector video. Tristan, you need roughly 25 to 30% more fuel if you're running E85. So your injector has to be that much bigger if you're going to make that power on E85. That's an easy thing to remember for E85. And then on methanol, it has to be lots more than that. And then on nitromethane, way more. Do I see K24A2s at the junkyard? No, not very many. I do see the J series, which I like. I see quite a few of those, and I think those are good. We're going to try to run one of those on the engine dyno before too long. Nitromethane injectors like fire hoses. Yeah, because the stroke value is 1.7. So it's, what is that? What did I say? That's like more than 8 times the your injector has to be 8 times bigger than it does on running gas. So that's big. Lots more and way more. And depends how many A's you have in there for the scaling. Yeah, 1.7. So that's a lot of fuel. Come on, camera. don't play games with me. Come on. Don't play with my emotions. Have you heard of inertia blower dyno? I haven't. Also, engine inertia dyno. Are you talking about a chassis dyno? I haven't heard of an inertia blower dyno. And injector shouldn't be a problem running E85. You do need a pump that's E85 compatible, and also fuel lines. Yeah, nitromethane, you go through a lot of fuel. It's a lot. I kind of now want to try methanol because I haven't run it on anything. I want to try on that 5.3 that was in the video that I put up today and for the last couple of days. I want to try E85 on that, but I also want to try methanol on it and see what we can do. I got some other things I want to test. So we're talking about injectors. Can you easily get the pulse width of those huge 1500cc ones down to where you can run proper air fuel at idle And low boost, low RPM is not a problem. The idle would be the critical thing for, say, a 2-liter 4-cylinder. 2-liter 4-cylinder would be half, so that'd be a 4-liter V8. Are you talking about on gas or on E85? On E85, the idle, the potential for idle quality would be better because you're using more fuel on E85. On gas, it would be harder. Can't justify running anything that doesn't run fine on pump gas. Is that 1.7 to 1 for more power? No, that's the stoic value. It's actually going to run a little bit richer than that to make power. Has anyone ever converted a gasoline engine to a diesel engine? 1500 cc's. Tristan, what power output are you trying to make? 1,000 horsepower on? Are you trying to make it on E85? 15s would be better than 1500 cc's would be better than 210s. We know that those will idle because I've idled 4.8s with those before. Oh, you're only trying to make 720 on boost? Then you don't need a 1500 cc. 1,000 cc would be fine. And if you're not, even if you are using E85, you probably get away with 80-pound injectors, and those are cheap. The 80-pound deck injectors are cheap. Yeah, Mad Mod. He said, I live in the Midwest where ethanol is plentiful. I just wish I could get an E85 carb, a blow-through E85 carburetor without spending an arm and a leg. Yeah. Decap stock injectors would be fine. I don't recommend that unless you can decap a whole bunch of them and get 8 good ones. An LS converted to a diesel. Yeah, I don't think you'd want to do that. I don't think that there would be a reason to do that. At least I can't think of one. I was thinking E85. I can use ID1000 injectors. Yeah, those will be fine. For 720 horsepower, you could use 80-pound injectors on E85. They have enough to support that power level. But those 1000s would be fine. One more minute. Uno momento más, por favor. Richard, I like stock type of long runner manifolds, but like the idea of an aluminum intake for an LS53 rev into 7,000 and abusing with boost and or nitrous. Do you think BBK is my best bet? I don't think that the BBK LS manifold would ever be my go-to manifold not for an LS. The best manifold that you can get for a 5.3 in 7,000 and less is a fast manifold. Inertia dyno is a big weight, and you measure the RPM degradation by time. How are you changing the weight? Are you accelerating it, or what are you doing? With my buddy's Corvette with those injectors. Yeah, Tristan, the injectors are not going to make or break the combination. Like bad injectors can, and improperly tuned any injector, whether it's good or bad, can cause problems. But the injectors didn't make that combination. He had a good combination, and then he had the tune right in it, and that would make it fast. But you could get that with lots of different injectors. Teeth Tooth, thanks for watching the Coyote one. And on that note, it's time to go. But I'll be back tonight. But if you haven't, please take a look at the video that I have up on the Coyote versus LS, and let me know in the comments what you think about Coyote versus LS. Late.